Okay, so welcome to my talk on my project called Reverbtions Lab, and we will also be discussing today Aime Cesaire's uh, essay, Poetry, and Knowledge. So first with Reverbtions Lab. Reverbtions Lab is a project that I started in 2022 with the Lewis Latimer House Museum. And so Lewis Latimer was a Black inventor from the United States, and he was known for either creating or helping other inventors to create blueprints for their infinventions. But besides being an inventor, he also was a poet. So a lot of his work also has influenced how I've been thinking about poetry. And so it has been cultivating into what Reverbtions Lab is. So when I was going to do this session in November, but I had to postpone for emergency reasons, it was originally for the mushrooming sessions. So that reminded me of a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. And she explained that a word called papawi, I'm not sure if that's how it's said, but she said the word papawi translates as the force with which causes mushrooms to push up from the earth overnight. And Robin, being a biologist, was stunned that that word existed. And she continued, the maker of this word understood a world full of being, full of unseen energies that animate everything. I've cherished it for many years as a talisman and longed for the people who gave a name to the life force of mushrooms. The language that holds Papawi is one that I wanted to speak. So when I learned that the word for arising, for emergence, belonged to the language of my ancestors, it became a signpost for me. And I love this quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer because it highlighted for me that science exists in every culture. But when it comes to Western science, it often tries to monopolize what science is or monopolize what knowledge making and methods of acquiring knowledge and understanding the world around us is. And so my work with Reverbtions Lab is deconstructing and decolonizing language to think about it as a tool for creating knowledge. So one of my questions for Reverbtions Lab is, what is your scientific language of knowledge? So another question I usually have is, what was the name of a scientist before it became a Western profession? So the term scientist actually didn't exist until the 19th century, and it had to do with a female scientist of who was called a cultivator of science. Originally, it was applied to mostly male scientists, but the creator of the word, let me show you the actual article, William Wehel, he coined the term for a a woman who was known as a polymath. I'm forgetting her name now. Um, I have it in the other article. Let me check. Mary Somerville. So Mary Somerville was who the term was coined for because it was in Western culture associated mostly with men. So as a woman in that field of at this point it was called like the philosophy of science. So as a woman in that field, they didn't really have a term, a general term for a scientist. So William Wehel, who appreciated her work, decided to coin the term for her. But I wanted to point out that this kind of brings up the idea of scientists or people who study the world around them and observe the world around them existing before that kind of codification of the field and the name in the West. So other names that I wanted to list, I listed here, philosopher, a wise fool, a polymath, a priest, a scholar or oracle, a witch, a wizard, a magician, a medicine person, an herbalist, an alchemist, an inquirer, a curious person, a critical thinker, an engager of the unknown, the mysteries. So before we go to the next slide, I wanted to ask you both, what is your scientific language, or what is the name of a scientist for you? So feel free to share that in the chat as well. Oh, Wiku. Am I pronouncing it right? Wiku, a monk, a Balian, a wellness priest. Cesare said an alchemist. For me, the language revolves around medicine, but when I think of a label, I think alchemy. Mm. And Haidai, you said Owiku? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Wiku. It means a monk.
A monk.
Yeah, but he deals around spiritual this thing called taksu, which is spiritual energy,
Mm,
which is now all being explained by quantum, right?
mhm. Right. And so the other ones are Bali and Taksu. Thank you for
Yeah, so yeah,
Yeah, it's shaman.
yeah, shaman.
yeah. So thank you for sharing those. And so as you can see that various cultures have already had these kind of people existing. And so, in thinking about that, I wanted to explain for myself what Reverbtions Lab is. But before I explain it on a fuller scale, I want to ask you all, what do you think Reverbtions Lab is? Because I also believe definitions aren't just a singular act, but a communal process of meaning as well.
I originally thought of like reflection, but is reaction or redoing something with more clarity to the distinction of the action.
Great, actually, redoing for more clarity.
Like to me, yoga poses a form of reversion, right?
Mm,
It's taking a few few action and made it into a pose or made it into a move. That's my first thought.
thank you.
Completely.
And Chisara said reverb, echo, multiplication, amplification, its action. Yes. Thank you both. And I will credit you when I share this in the future as well.
You go.
Let me correct that later. Oops. Okay. So now I will share my definitions. So, Reverbtions Lab is a community or oriented traveling poetic lab exploring poetry and poetics as technology for knowledge making, inquiry, and linguistic invention. And so, what influenced the name of the lab was I'm of Caribbean descent. And so, in Caribbean musical practice, there's this term called reversioning. And so, reversioning is sampling old rhythms to create new songs. And the word reversion also means to return back to and remix a source material. So I believe that there's a collective source pool of knowledge, and we're constantly returning back to that source pools of knowledge and remixing them into various new knowledges or various new expressions of knowledges. And then the next one, reverb, a musical effect related to echoes, as Chisara said, the persistence of a sound after it's produced. So that relates to reversioning, that you'll have a creation of an initial sound, and then that sound echoes through the environment into multiple other forms. And then the word verb as an action word. And so, as both of you have said, doing an action again, redoing the action again, and that kind of ritualistic process of doing an action over and over again. So the action or process of a word moving, continuing, and changing form across time and space, and then doing that as a continual repeating process. Yes, reverse, returning.
I like it.
So this was also a poetic definition that I had created for myself earlier that I probably will evolve and revise in the future, but it's the active embodiment of the word and all of its vibrations to turn, to transform, to respond, to watch, to witness, to reflect, to wear, to fashion, to costume the self, to carry, to hold up, to maintain. A question is an invitation to reverb, results in tonal shifts when the word is embodied in another. Word, word. When reverb happens enough, it becomes itself, like God hearding itself clearly, the deep reflection, the an, in, on, un, of the an and in on un entire frequency, the container of I, writhing, trembling, troubling itself, a gathering of resonances. What does the word sound like within? The hum known, a mystery of internment manifests. Put it together as int the living word made flow, made reflex, made verse. Reverb is learning to breathe again through research, resource, resurge, wandering around till you return back to yourself as a question. E equals nt E times ER squared. So that was me turning the word enter into a chemical formula. Yeah,
Can you zoom that? I can't read the small text. Is that a slide or is that just a Word document?
it's a
Can you make
slide
it,
from
can you make it a slide and fill the screen so we can see it?
um,
Possible? Is that, oh,
there you go.
oh yeah, that, there
Yeah.
you go. Ooh, I like it. The deep reflection. That's very nice.
Yeah, and you also said you thought of it as reflection. So we were synced
Yeah.
that way.
No, yeah, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I like it that you're breaking it into uh um when you repeat something, it becomes a ritual. And that's,
Mhm.
I come from Bali and I'm a priest from Bali. And so for us, our ritual is this reverb, of and how precise it is in an embodiment. Like it's like the fine tuning of it for like real understanding is so essential.
Hmm. Yes. Thank you so much.
Beautiful.
Oh, wait. Two people are waiting in the room, so let me let them in. Welcome, welcome. We're just going through what Reverbtions Lab is, and you can read my poetic definition here. I'm also recording, so feel free to stay off camera, and I'll share the recording later for what you missed earlier. So, I wanted to share some other inspirations for how I think about Reverbtions Lab. And this is from Catherine McKittrick's book called Dear Science. And she wrote, reading anti-colonially is a deciphering practice. Positioned as open questioning, method, and methodology are unhinged from the status of the noun and thrown to the less predictable work of the verb. So, Catherine McKittrick in Dear Science talks about how Western science is about objectification and turning everything essentially into this kind of fixed noun that doesn't change and doesn't become something else. And so, Catherine McKittrick wants us to move out of this kind of categorical objectification thinking to a more dynamic verb action oriented view of knowledge, that knowledge is a process and is continuously changing and moving. And Hortense Spiller, she also wrote for Black women about the importance of looking for your own verb. So she called it the unvoiced, the misseen, the not doing, awaiting their verb. So for me, this quote also highlights the importance of what are we not paying attention to? What are we not doing that needs to be actually activated and put into action so we can create new knowledges for ourselves? So I wanted to share this brief part from Alexander Avila's video that I thought was interesting in thinking about the history of how we create knowledge.
Male and female, the masculine and feminine, men and women. But what does that mean exactly? Because these weren't always biological categories. Biology, the modern discipline we know today as biology, didn't exist. Now, I get what you might be thinking. Penis and vagina, that's as biological as it gets. Case closed. But these weren't always biological objects. The body was not always viewed and therefore treated as a biological object. Biology is a modern discipline that carries with it a modern lens. The concept of biological, as we understand it today, didn't exist in antiquity. Biology is a 19th century invention born out of a particular pattern of thought.
Historians want to write histories of biology in the 18th century, but they do not realize that biology did not exist then, and that the pattern of knowledge that has been familiar to us for 150 years is not valid for a previous period.
This isn't to say that there weren't plant dudes studying plants. There were, and anatomy has existed as long as the Greeks were taking it up the ass. When Foucault says that biology did not exist, he's saying that the modern biological sciences require a contemporary way of viewing the world. In order to do biology, you have to be able to think in terms of abstract notions like life, systems, and function. But this pattern of thought wasn't really common until the 19th century. First, we have to understand that knowledge creation isn't a straightforward thing. There's rules for admission, but these rules aren't written anywhere. They are underlying cultural understandings that change over time. Our society and culture has rules that determine what gets to be added to the official knowledge pile. Not only do these rules concern who gets to produce knowledge, but what actually counts as legitimate knowledge. And over time, these rules change drastically, even fundamentally. Let's take a famous example from Foucault's book, The Order of Things. Pretend you're a horse girl. Horses are your life. You're in so deep that you're reading pre-19th century texts about the natural history of horses. Horse girl, what would you expect to find in an official and respectable book about the natural properties of horses? As you peruse these equestrian natural histories, you start to notice something. You start to notice that in books written before the 17th century or the medieval period, books about the nature of horses contain what you expect: observations about horse features, drawings of its organs, horse diets, but there's also a wealth of other information: fables including horses, poems written about horses, horse tropes and folklore. Basically, everything that falls under the symbolic universe of horse is a part of its official, objective, natural knowledge. But then you notice that in books written after the 17th century or in the classical period, the natural history of horses omits these fables and poems. Books from the classical period only tell you observable facts about the horse. Why? Because between the medieval and classical period, the rules for creating knowledge changed. In the medieval period, the
So I'll share. I will share the
job,
link,
male and
link
female.
to that later, so you can watch the whole video. But I really zoned in on that part of his talk and thinking about how our rules around knowledge creation have changed and how Western colonialization has affected what we think of as knowledge. Because in the past, knowledge was much more broad, much more expansive, much more involving how we as human beings perceive and observe things and our relation and connection to things, not just turning something into this object that we're disconnected from, but also how we relate to it, whether it's through poetry or storytelling. And I don't want to run out of time, but this is another video that also goes into science and language and how the cultures that we live in shape our sciences and shape what we know and shape what is possible for us to know. So, for example, in this video, they discuss Cedric J. Robinson's work, Forgeries of Memory, and how colonialism, capitalism affect what is science, right? Affect what sciences are invested in, affect what we know, because what is supported is going to get the most attention. And I'll share this video later as well. Oops.
Yeah.
So, in bringing to Aime Cesaire's poetry and knowledge, a lot of my work also goes into etymology. And so, the etymology of poetry, I got 10 minutes. Um, the etymology of poetry basically says that poetry is something that is built and created. It's something that is piled up. It's an action or a deed. And knowledge is also something similar as well. That the ledge part of knowledge is an action or a process, and it's the action or process of turning something or becoming something or growing something. and it's growing into that action of knowing. So knowledge is an action word. It is not just simply an object. So knowledge is a dynamic process, a theorizing. It is not a fixed collection of facts. That's what I have written over here. Knowledge is something that's crafted, it's remembered, and it's constantly changing across time and space. Knowledge is the action or poetry of knowing. Knowledge is a verbal process. So to end, I'm going to read the first page of Poetry and Knowledge, and then I will share the PDF with you in the email so you can read the rest on your own. But I just want to give a little look into how Aime Cesaire thinks of poetry as a tool for knowledge creation. So I'm going to stop the share here. And I'm going to share Aime Cesaire's work. So Aime Cesaire is a French Martinican from the Caribbean island of Martinique, scholar and poet. And so this is a translation of his work into English. So I'm just going to quickly read the first page, and then we'll end the session today. So poetry and knowledge. Poetic knowledge is born in the great silence of scientific knowledge. Mankind, once bewildered by sheer facts, finally dominated them through reflection, observation, and experiment. Henceforth, mankind knows how to make its way through the forest of phenomena. It knows how to utilize the world, but it is not the lord of the world on that account. A view of the world, yes. Science affords a view of the world, but a summary and superficial view. Physics classifies and explains, but the essence of things eludes it. The natural sciences classify, but the quid pro prium of things eludes them. As for mathematics, what eludes its abstract and logical activity is reality itself. In short, scientific knowledge enumerates, measures, classifies, and kills, but it is not sufficient to state that scientific knowledge is a summary. It is necessary to add that it is a poor and half-starved. To acquire it, mankind has sacrificed everything, desires, fears, feelings, psychological complexes. To acquire the impersonality of scientific knowledge, mankind depersonalized itself, de-individualized itself. And impoverished knowledge, I submit for, at its inception, whatever other wealth it may have, there stands as an impoverished humanity. In Aldous Huxley's Do What You Will, there is a very amusing page. We all think we know what a lion is. A lion is a desert-colored animal with a mane and claws and an expression like Garibaldi's, but it is also in Africa all the neighboring antelopes and zebras, and therefore indirectly all the neighboring grass. If there were no antelopes and zebras, there would be no lion. When the supply of game runs low, the king of beasts grows thin and mangy. It ceases altogether, and he dies. It is just the same with knowledge. Scientific knowledge is a lion without antelopes and without zebras. It is gnawed from within, gnawed by hunger, the hunger of feeling, the hunger of life. Then dissatisfied, mankind sought salvation elsewhere in the fullness of here and now. And mankind has gradually become aware that side by side with this half-starved scientific knowledge, there's another kind of knowledge, a fulfilling knowledge. I'm going to stop there. So in this essay, oops, in this essay, Aime Cesaire talks about how poetry is a knowledge of relationship versus Western scientific knowledge. It's a science of categorization and isolation. where everything is broken apart, but it's not shown as having a relationship to one another that actually shows what life is. And so poetry as a tool for knowledge helps us understand how we as human beings relate to the world and not just observing the world and treating the rest of the world as this object or tool for our own desires. So seeing knowledge differently through the lens of poetry versus the lens of scientific language. So Reversions Lab, as I continue it through the future, is going to be exploring that process of deconstructing scientific knowledge and exploring poetry more as a tool of knowledge making. And I will share all the videos and the PDF file with you all after this session. But thank you for joining me in this quick talk about Reversions Lab, and feel free in the last few minutes to share whatever comments that you may have as well.
Bravo, Sherese. Bravo.
Yeah,
Bravo.
beautiful.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in especially what Aime Cesaire was saying about the poetic knowledge and scientific knowledge. It seems like some of the folks you were quoting before, whether it was Catherine McKittrick or others, that there might be space to, I think it was actually the video that you showed.
Mhm.
There is an opportunity to not prioritize one over the other,
Yeah,
but see how they provide they create
the
the
whole
whole picture.
picture.
That's the whole picture. I can't say it this morning. But you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
it seems like there's an opportunity there, even though I would lean to the side of poetic knowledge being that which needs to be prioritized.
Mm.
It feels like there's an opportunity to expand,
Yeah.
combine and expand, I
And
guess.
Césaire talks a little bit more about that in the rest of the essay. He talks about image versus judgment and how image gives you, like you said, a fuller picture of
Mm,
life versus judgment, which is about kind of isolating oneself
yes.
the rest of life. Yeah.
Ashe.
Yeah, this is also very much in the alignment what we were talking about with poetry, where poetry came two type of research. Is one is Dr. Schlein, which is Goddess in the Alphabet Soup, talking about one time everything was around the goddess and the temple, and everything was about nurturing. And then when the deployment of language came, then it started being rewritten to more gods, and because it's just more ideals, because language is linear, so it puts these things on top rather than the nurturing, which is more energetic and more about that type of reverb exchanges rather than ideas and linear talk. So that's one. The other one is the concept of ekphrasis that we were talking about, which might be a very good thing when it went from more of oral communication to written communication. The technology of writing made poetry to become accessible.
Yeah.
So then now the poet is known as the writer. But before, Ekphrasis poetry was art within art. So anytime you took one medium and translated another medium, like music to dance, right? Or the longest use of Ekphrasis is poetry. I mean, filmmaking, a script.
I don't want us to run out of time, so I
So anyway.
I would like to end there, but thank you so much for sharing. And if you have any more ideas or you want to contribute to the lab in any way, please do